Before starting, I would really like to recognize and acknowledge all the pastors in this church, all the teachers in this church that spend time to study the Word and to give us some good food, some sound doctrine, and also the Sunday school teachers as well. Thank you for your time, your investment. God bless you. So we've started a new series on the topic of healing. And if we could have the first slide. So just for us to remember what healing is all about. And so the Cambridge Dictionary says that it's an active process of restoring health, wholeness, and soundness. It's also an ongoing transformation that applies to damaged biological tissue, as well as the mending of emotional distress, psychological trauma, or fractured relationships. We see that there are various dimensions of healing. There's the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, and the relational. Now, let's look at our passage, which is taken from Mark 5, verse 1 to 20. And it's the story of the demon-possessed man. We're going to look at 4 different thoughts in this passage. There are some parts of this passage that we're not going to look into detail, not because we dismiss what's said in the Word, but because the content is more about healing. So we will focus on healing. First of all, let's look at the man's condition. So the man's condition is more or less seen from verses 1 to 5. And we see that he lived among tombs, the tombs. And this is definitely not a natural place for a human being to live. The second point is that no one could restrain him, not even chains. We know that the purpose of a chain is to restrain, is to hold something. So this shows that he had no ordinary strength. It was a supernatural strength which was empowered by an unclean spirit. And I'm sure that a lot of men in this place would like to have a supernatural strength to be able to hold, furniture with one hand and, being able to do so many different things. But the enemy may promise power, but it always comes with destruction. Now, this condition, it was not just on him that this condition had an impact. Because of this, he lived in isolation because the shackles and the chains kept on breaking. So people had to again and again, well, the Bible doesn't say it, but we can imagine that they had to put the chains again and again. He also cried out continuously, and he was cutting himself. But everything changes in verse 6. The man saw Jesus from afar. He ran towards him and worshipped him. The man positioned himself before the only one who had authority over his condition. When we go to our second thought, we see Jesus' absolute authority. From verses 7 to 13, at the beginning we see, and I think we could have a glimpse to see how much compassion Jesus had towards this man. Let's just picture it. Just imagine, we don't know how long this man was living in tombs, how long he was cutting himself. But just imagine a man that was, most probably very dirty. His hair must have been in such a state. And he's running towards Jesus. And Jesus embraced him. He let him worship him. He did not judge him. He did not shame him. And most of all, he did not push him away. The demons immediately recognized who Jesus was. Jesus didn't hesitate. There was no prescription, no investigation. He simply commanded, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Authority doesn't need to argue. Jesus identified and commanded to leave. Even the kingdom of darkness operates under Jesus' ultimate authority. When we go to our next thought, we see how the world reacts. The herdmen fled after that their flock had drowned, and they reported what had happened. So in this passage from verses 14 to 17, that's when the demons went into the pigs, and the pigs ran and drowned into the sea. Now, I like to imagine a lot of things because the Bible is not always very clear on things. So I like to kind of try and imagine. So I'm just imagining these herdmen sitting, enjoying, I don't know, maybe it was a sunny day, talking, having some fun together. The pigs are eating, sleeping, whatever. And all of a sudden, the pigs just run out and get drowned in the sea. So your first reaction would be like, what's going on, and maybe there were sheep that were going to be slaughtered to get bacon, sausage, I don't know. So maybe these men, their pigs, were their only wage that they had for the month of the year, and that's just drowned into the sea. So we can probably maybe understand why they were not happy and that they asked Jesus to leave. However, the man, the former demon-possessed man, he was sitting, he was clothed, and he was in his right mind. What a transformation. This miracle that should have produced celebration produced the contrary. People got afraid and asked Jesus to leave. Relationships were broken. The man was rejected before his healing and even after his healing. He must have felt very, very sad, like his life doesn't matter, or he's a bother to everybody. But, and with God, there's a lot of buts in our stories. It's not the end of the story. And we arrive to our last point where we see the man's purpose. He wanted to stay with Jesus. We don't really know why, but I think it was most probably because people rejected him and Jesus didn't. And also because Jesus completely changed his life. But Jesus says in verse 19, "Go home to your friends, tell them what the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you." Deliverance wasn't the end. It became the beginning of his mission. Jesus gave the man's life purpose. And as a result, everyone marveled and his life had an impact. Do you remember the definition of healing and the various dimensions? Here, we see that all of those dimensions were completely made whole. Next slide, let's look at some takeaways from this passage. There is no bondage too great for Jesus. Jesus crossed the sea for one broken life. Where the enemy brought torment, Jesus brought life. Where there had been isolation, Jesus brought peace. Where there had been bondage, Jesus demonstrated absolute authority. Where there had been shame, Jesus created a testimony that caused many to marvel. As a conclusion, we see that Jesus, the same Jesus who delivered that man in Mark 5, still has authority today. He still restores lives, he still set captives free, and he turned broken stories into testimonies that glorify God. Thank you for listening. God bless you.